The graveyard was silent, as all graveyards are. But this one was a tomb of titans, a floating testament to a war fought so long ago that its reasons had turned to dust along with the bones of its combatants. The Seraphim Boneyard, the old prospectors called it, a chaotic sprawl of shattered warships and skeletal space stations adrift in the black between systems, too far from any major trade lane to be worth the official salvage rights. For a small, independent scrapper crew like the one aboard the Stardust Drifter, however, not worth it was another way of saying profitable. Captain Kalen Vance lived by that creed. He stood on the cramped bridge, a man built of pragmatism and gristle, watching the ship's magnetic grapples latch onto the fractured spine of a Vithar dreadnought. The ship groaned in protest, the sound of stressed metal and complaining hydraulics a constant symphony in Kyl's ears. "Easy does it, Jax," he grunted into the comms, his eyes fixed on the view screen where the derelict warship spun in a slow, mournful ballet. "She's been dead 1,000 years. No need to shake her into smaller pieces. The corp pays by the ton." In the science station, tucked away in a corner usually reserved for cargo analysis, "Doctor." Eris Thorne felt a familiar pang of dissonance. He wasn't a scrapper, he was a xenolinguist, a disgraced academic who traded a university tenure for a bunk on a salvage ship after his theories on proto-universal grammar were laughed out of the conclave. Kyl had hired him on the cheap, hoping his expertise might help identify high-value artifacts among the cosmic junk. So far, Eris had mostly cataloged alloys and dated power conduits, his intellect feeling as rusted as the hulls they tore apart. Anything interesting. Doc Cale's voice crackled over the internal comm, laced with its usual blend of hope and skepticism. Eris ran a final scan over the Vithar wreck. The Vithar were a long-extinct species, known only for their beautiful, brutalist ship designs and a language no one had ever deciphered. His screen was a waterfall of mundane data iridium plating, decaying energy signatures, microfractures consistent with plasma scoring. Just more of the same. "Captain," Eris sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Standard Vithar construction. Whatever killed them did a thorough job." But then, something flickered. A pocket of null energy deep within the command spire of the dead ship. It wasn't a void, it was an active suppression. A space that was deliberately, impossibly empty. "Wait," Eris breathed, leaning closer, his fingers flying across the console. "There's a shielded compartment near the derelict's bridge. The shielding isn't Vithar tech. It's not anything I recognize." Kyl's interest was piqued. Unrecognized tech was either worthless or priceless, and he'd built his career gambling on the latter. "Can we get to it?" he asked. "The spire is a mess of tangled metal." "I'll need to go myself," Eris replied, a spark of the old academic fire returning to his eyes. "I'll need Lena to cut a path." The ship's engineer, a woman with engine grease under her fingernails and a plasma torch for a paintbrush, grumbled her assent over the comms. And within the hour, Eris was floating through the silent guts of the alien warship. The scale of it was humbling. Corridors built for beings twice his height were twisted into metallic ribbons. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss of his suit's recyclers and the roar of Lena's torch echoing from down the passage. He found the compartment exactly where the scanner had indicated. A smooth, seamless wall of black material was embedded in the jagged Vithar bulkhead, utterly out of place. There were no visible controls, no seams, no power source. Lena floated up behind him, her torch powering down with a sigh. "Well, that's a thing," she said, her voice tinny in his helmet. "You want me to cut it?" "No," Eris said instinctively. "This isn't something you brute force." He ran his gloved hand over the surface. It was cool to the touch, and it seemed to absorb the light from his helmet lamp. He felt a faint, almost subliminal vibration against his palm, a thrum that felt less like energy and more like grammar, like a perfectly structured sentence waiting to be spoken. On a hunch, he modulated the frequency of his suit's short-range comm, cycling through sonic patterns, not trying to broadcast, but to resonate. He wasn't looking for a password. He was trying to find the right question. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low chime echoed, not through his helmet's speakers, but directly inside his skull. The seamless wall shimmered, and a section of it retracted, revealing a small, dark chamber. Floating in the center was an obsidian prism, no larger than his forearm. Its surface a perfect, non-reflective black. It didn't hum or glow, it simply existed. Its presence a stark rebuttal to the chaos around it. Back aboard the Stardust Drifter, the prism sat on a containment field in Eris's lab, a piece of midnight that had fallen into their world. Kyle stared at it, his reflection conspicuously absent from its surface. So, what is it, he finally asked? A data core, a weapon, a paperweight, I don't know, Eris admitted, his mind racing. But the Vthar died to protect it. They built a vault for it inside their own ship. Whatever it is, they believed it was important. For the next cycle, Eris worked, running every diagnostic he could think of. The prism was inert, its atomic structure stable but unlike any known matter. It emitted no radiation, no energy, no data streams. It was a lock, and he didn't have the key. Frustrated and haunted by the memory of the chime in his head, he decided to try a different approach. He wasn't dealing with technology as he understood it. He was dealing with a form of communication. He rerouted the ship's primary sensor array, not to scan the object, but to listen to it, translating its subtle quantum vibrations into audible frequencies. He surrounded the prism with a symphony of resonant noise, a carefully constructed wave of pure linguistic theory. He was trying to speak its language. The effect was instantaneous and violent. A deep, resonant tone erupted from the prism, a sound so low and powerful it shook the deck plates. Alarms blared across the ship as the containment field overloaded. The lights on the bridge flickered and died, plunging them into emergency red. For Eris, it was infinitely worse. The sound bypassed his ears and slammed directly into his consciousness. His vision dissolved into a maelstrom of light and sensation. He tasted ozone and felt the gut-wrenching lurch of a planet being torn from its orbit. He heard whispers in a language of flowing light and resonant angles, words he'd never known, but somehow understood on a primal level. And, through it all, one image burned itself into his mind's eye, a searing brand of white-hot light, a perfect, three-pointed spiral, a glyph that was both a symbol and a source of immense, terrifying power. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. Aris collapsed, his nose bleeding, the ghost of the glyph still pulsing behind his eyelids. Kyle and Jax burst into the lab to find him sprawled on the floor, the obsidian prism now floating silently above its fried containment unit, as inert as before. "What in the hell was that, Doc?" Kyle roared, helping him to a sitting position. "You nearly blew every system on this rust bucket." Eris could only shake his head, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's not a thing, Kyle. It's a voice. It's a memory." He tried to explain the flood of sensations, the impossible knowledge that had brushed against his mind, the glyph that felt more real than the ship around him. Kyle listened, his expression shifting from anger to a shrewd, calculating curiosity. "A memory," he repeated slowly. "Ancient, powerful, and one of a kind. Do you have any idea what a collector on Titan's Reach would pay for that?" "No," Eris shot back, scrambling to his feet. "You can't sell it. This is more important than money. It's a key, or a map, or a warning. Putting this on the open market would be like handing a plague sample to a child. It's a payday." "Aris," Kyle said, his voice hard. "My only responsibility is to this ship and this crew. We're setting a course for Titan's Reach. You can write your academic papers from a luxury suite." The argument was futile. Kyle was captain. As Jax began plotting their course, a new alarm chirped from the long-range sensor console, a soft, insistent beep that was easy to ignore in the aftermath of the chaos. Lena, resetting the power relays, was the first to notice it. "Captain," she called out, her voice tight with confusion. "There's something out there, coming in fast." On the main screen, a single, distorted signature resolved from the static of the boneyard. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a sliver of active darkness, a predator made of sharp, impossible angles that seemed to shift and fold in on themselves. It showed up on gravity sensors but was almost invisible on optical, a ghost wearing the camouflage of space-time itself. "What is that?" Jax muttered, his pilot's instinct screaming. "No transponder, no heat signature. It's like it's not really there." Eris stared at the shape, a cold dread seeping into his bones. The design, the way it moved without visible propulsion, it resonated with the fractured, terrifying memories the prism had shown him. It was a hunter. "It's here because of the prism," Eris said, his voice trembling. "We woke it up, or we called to it." Kale swore, his greed instantly replaced by the primal fear of a captain cornered. "Evasive maneuvers. Jax, get us out of here, Lena. I want full power to the engines. Now!" The Stardust Drifter was a workhorse, not a racer. It shuddered as the engines roared to life, pushing the bulky vessel into a clumsy acceleration. The ghost ship matched their pace effortlessly, closing the distance with silent, terrifying speed. It didn't fire lasers or launch missiles. Instead, a wave of distortion washed over them. The artificial gravity on the bridge fluctuated wildly, and the emergency lights began to flicker and warp, the red light stretching like taffy. A high-pitched whine filled the air, a sound that felt like it was trying to unspool their minds. Jax cried out, clutching his head. "I can't. The nav computer is glitching. It's showing our position in 3 different places at once." The hunter was almost upon them, its non-Euclidean form seeming to blot out the stars. They were outmatched, outmaneuvered, and being dismantled on a physical and psychological level. Desperate, Eris stumbled back toward the lab, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. He reached the obsidian prism, which now pulsed with a faint, deep red light. The glyph in his mind flared, a beacon in the storm of sensory chaos. Without thinking, he placed his palm flat against its cool surface. The connection was immediate. He wasn't just remembering the glyph, he was speaking it. The ship's internal comm system screeched, and a focused, coherent pulse of the same resonant energy that had knocked him out shot from the drifter's main comms dish. It wasn't a weapon, it was a single, defiant word spoken in a language older than stars. A word that meant, "I am here." The effect on the ghost ship was staggering. The dark, shifting hull seemed to lose its cohesion, flickering violently as if struck by a physical blow. The disorienting field around them collapsed. The hunter, for the first time, seemed surprised, even afraid. It veered off its attack vector, its impossible angles momentarily losing their sharpness. "Now, Jax! Now!" Kale yelled, seizing the opportunity. The pilot, his head clear, slammed the controls. The drifter dove toward a massive, rotating shard of a destroyed space station, a spinning wall of metal and rock thousands of kilometers wide. They skimmed its surface, the ship's proximity alarm screaming, using the colossal piece of debris to break the hunter's line of sight. They flew blind, running on sheer nerve until they emerged on the other side. The ghost ship was gone. Silence descended on the bridge, thick and heavy. The crew stared at each other, their faces pale, their chests heaving. They were alive. They were clear. But they were no longer just scrappers. They were prey. Kyle turned slowly, his hard eyes locking onto Eris, who stood trembling in the doorway of the lab, his hand still glowing with a faint, residual light from the prism. The captain's pragmatism had been shattered, replaced by a fear far deeper than a missed payday. The obsidian prism floated silently behind Eris, a piece of ancient night that held the key to a past humanity had forgotten and a Vader that was now hunting them through the dark. "What now?" "Doc," Kale asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What in God's name do we do now?" The silence on the bridge of the Stardust Drifter was a brittle thing, threatening to shatter at the slightest sound. It was Kyle who finally broke it, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that seemed to scrape against the metallic walls. "Talk, Aris. All of it. Now." He stood with his arms crossed, his usual scrapper's swagger gone, replaced by the rigid posture of a man who had just stared into an abyss and seen it stare back. Eris leaned against the lab doorway, the residual energy from the prism making his nerves feel like frayed wires. He took a shaky breath, trying to organize the torrent of fractured memories and alien concepts that had been fire-hosed into his brain. "They're called the Silent," he began, the name coming to him unbidden, a piece of dark certainty in a sea of questions. "The ship that attacked us. It's a hunter. It doesn't hunt people or ships. It hunts echoes. It hunts history." Lena, wiping grease from her brow with the back of her hand, scoffed from the engineering console. "History doesn't try to rip your ship apart on a quantum level. That thing was real, Eris." "It was," Eris agreed, his gaze distant. "But it was attacking the prism. When I activated it, we sent out a flare, a signal that screamed across a channel they've been monitoring for millennia. The prism isn't just an object, it's a codex, a fragment of a vast, forgotten library." Jack swiveled in the pilot's chair, his face pale. "And that glyph thing you did the light show. That was a word," Eris said, looking at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. "A single concept from the library's root language. I didn't even know what I was doing. I just felt it. It was a declaration of existence, of presence, and for some reason, it hurt them. It goes against their very nature." Kyle's eyes narrowed, the gears of his pragmatic mind grinding against the impossible new reality. "Their nature. And what is that? To erase," Eris whispered, the word tasting like ash. "They are a force of entropy, of silence. The memories I saw, they weren't just of a civilization, they were of a reality built on a different kind of physics. A physics of language, of creation. Our ancestors and I mean all of us. Humanity, they weren't just explorers. They were speakers. They could shape reality with this language. The silent were their antithesis, the void that answered their voice. He gestured back toward the lab, where the obsidian prism floated, its inner light now dormant. That is one of the last remaining dictionaries, and the silent want it burned. The weight of his words settled over the crew. They weren't just in trouble. They were part of a cosmic conflict so ancient it had been relegated to the realm of myth, a myth they hadn't even known existed. Kyle ran a hand over his face. The decision he had to make monumental. His plan to sell the artifact on Titan's Reach was now a laughable fantasy. Going to any civilized port would be suicide. The silent would be watching, and bringing their attention to a populated system was a massacre waiting to happen. They were marked. "So we run," Jack said, his voice flat. "Disappear into the outer rim. Change the ship's ID. Lay low for a decade or two. They found us in the Seraphim Boneyard, Jax," Lena countered grimly. "That's as disappeared as you can get. They're not hunting the ship, they're hunting the rock. As long as we have it, they'll find us." "She's right," Eris affirmed. "The connection I made, it's a two-way street. They felt me, and now I can feel them. A faint, cold presence at the edge of everything. They haven't given up. They're just regrouping, searching." Kyle stared at Eris. A long, unnerving silence stretching between them. The academic was no longer just a cheap asset. He was the navigator and the map for a voyage no one had ever charted. The captain's instincts, honed over years of high-risk salvage, were screaming at him. Running was a slow death. Hiding was a fantasy. That left only one option, the one that went against every fiber of his being, moving toward the danger. "You said the prism is a fragment," Kyle stated, his voice regaining some of its command. "That implies there are others. This language, this power, can it be used to fight them?" Eris hesitated, the immensity of the thought staggering. I think so. The word I spoke was defensive, a reflexive act. But the memories, they showed. Cities of light, ships that sailed on waves of spoken sound, stars born from a single resonant verse. The potential is infinite, but I don't know how to access it. I'm like a child who found a fusion reactor and somehow managed to turn on a light bulb without vaporizing the continent. "Then you need to learn," Kyle said, his decision solidifying. "Where do we go? The prism must have given you something. A location, a clue." Eris closed his eyes, focusing inward, pushing past the fear and the static. He chased the echo of the memory, the fragments of starlight and impossible architecture. A name coalesced, a place that felt more like a concept than a physical location. There's a place, or there was. It was called the Orrery, a celestial library where the speakers catalog their knowledge. The memory is corrupted, shattered, but it points to a region, a stellar nursery known on our charts as the Caledon Nebula. Jax let out a low whistle. "The Caledon Nebula, Captain. That's a ship killer. Gravitational tides, protostar flares, rogue magnetars. No one goes in there unless they have a death wish." "We're already on a death clock, Jax," Kale shot back. "The difference is, this path might have an exit. Eris, can you be more specific? A nebula is a big place to get lost in." Eris concentrated again, letting the prism's subtle energy resonate with his own mind. He didn't dare touch it directly, not yet, but even proximity was enough. A star chart bloomed behind his eyelids, ancient and unfamiliar, but he could cross-reference the positions of the pulsars he saw with modern galactic maps. There's a binary star system deep inside, a white dwarf and a neutron star locked in a tight orbit. The orrery was built in their gravitational lull, at the still point of the turning chaos. That's our destination. The new plan hung in the air, audacious and insane. To fly into the heart of one of the most dangerous regions of known space in a modified salvage hauler, chasing a ghost of a memory, hunted by shapeless horrors from the dawn of time. Lena was the first to break the tension. She cracked her knuckles, a familiar, determined look on her face. If we're going into the Caledon, I'll need to overhaul the inertial dampeners and reinforce the hull plating. The tidal stresses will tear us apart otherwise. It's going to take time and a lot of power. Take what you need, Kyle ordered. He then turned to Jax. Plot a course, not a straight line. I want the most unpredictable, treacherous route you can devise. Through asteroid fields, skirting black holes, whatever it takes to make us a nightmare to track. Buy Lena the time she needs. Jax nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. A scenic route. I can do that. KL finally looked back at Eris, his expression unreadable. And you need to figure out how to use our new dictionary without blowing us all to Kingdom Come. Learn the language. Find another word, something more useful than boo. Eris nodded, understanding the unspoken command. They weren't just running anymore. They were preparing for the next encounter. For the next 2 weeks, the Stardust Drifter became a ghost, flitting through the forgotten and dangerous corners of the galaxy. They skimmed the accretion disks of quasars and navigated the debris fields of supernova remnants. Jax flew with a desperate genius, making their trajectory a chaotic, unreadable scribble. In the engine room, Lena worked miracles, cannibalizing non-essential systems to reinforce the ship's integrity. Her plasma torch a constant star in the belly of the vessel. And in the lab, Eris began his lessons. He learned that direct physical contact with the prism was a gateway to madness, a raw, unfiltered torrent of information that threatened to shred his sanity. Instead, he found a way to interface with it through resonance, using carefully calibrated sonic frequencies and electromagnetic fields to coax specific data streams from its core. He started small, learning the alphabet of the ancient language, not letters, but conceptual glyphs that represented fundamental forces: gravity, light, time, thought. He discovered that his own DNA was part of the key. The prism was inert to Jax and Lena, but it resonated with him, with something latent in his human biology, a genetic echo of the speakers. He practiced forming simple words, projecting them as harmless pulses of energy within the confines of his shielded lab. He learned the glyph for shield, creating a shimmering, wafer-thin barrier of force that could stop a thrown wrench. He learned the glyph for light, conjuring a soft, warm glow in the palm of his hand. Each act left him drained, nursing a splitting headache. But with every success, his fear was tempered by a growing sense of wonder. He was reclaiming a lost piece of his own heritage, of humanity's heritage. During one of his sessions, as they navigated a particularly dense field of cosmic dust that played havoc with their sensors, he felt it again, the cold, static-filled presence of the silent. It was distant but searching, like a predator casting a net. He focused, pushing his newfound senses outward, and for a terrifying second, he made contact. He didn't see a ship, he saw a mind, if it could be called that. It was a consciousness of pure negation, an intelligence that viewed existence as a flaw to be corrected, a noise to be silenced. It saw him as a discordant note in the grand, silent symphony it wished to compose, and it knew they were heading for the Caledon Nebula. He stumbled back from the prism, gasping, a cold sweat on his brow. He burst onto the bridge, his eyes wide with alarm. "They know," he choked out. "They know where we're going. They're trying to get ahead of us." Kyle, who had been watching their approach to the nebula's violent, swirling outer clouds, didn't panic. His face was a mask of grim resolve. "How long? I don't know. Days, maybe less. They're faster than we are." "Then we're done running," Kyle declared. He pointed toward the roiling chaos of gas and newborn stars that filled the view screen. "Jax, take us in, straight through the heart of the storm. Let's see if those hunters can handle a little turbulence." The Stardust Drifter, battered and jury-rigged but stronger than ever, plunged into the fiery chaos of the Caledon Nebula. The ship screamed as it was battered by gravitational waves and stellar winds. On the bridge, Eris held onto a console, the prism in his lab glowing with a steady, protective light. He was no longer just a scholar. He was a weapon, and he was about to enter a library where the books were written in the language of creation itself. The hunters were coming, but for the first time, Eris felt a spark of something other than fear. It was defiance. They were the children of the speakers, and it was long past time they reminded the silence what a voice could do. The Caledon Nebula was not a gentle place. It was a cosmic womb and a violent tomb, a place where stars were born in fire and died in screaming gravitational collapses. For the Stardust Drifter, it was hell. The ship bucked and groaned, its hull plates vibrating with a low, resonant hum that set the crew's teeth on edge. Outside the viewport, rivers of incandescent plasma, wider than solar systems, flowed in majestic, deadly currents. Clusters of newborn blue giants bathed the bridge in an eerie, pulsating light, their stellar winds hammering the ship's shields like a physical fist. Jax wrestled with the controls, his face slick with sweat, his knuckles white. He wasn't so much flying the ship as he was surfing an endless, chaotic wave. "Gravity shear dead ahead," he barked. His eyes locked on the sensor display, which showed a region where space-time was being twisted like a wet towel. "Dampeners are already at 150% capacity. Captain, they won't take much more of this." In the engine room, which now resembled a welder's fever dream, Lena was in her element. She moved with a desperate, focused grace, rerouting power from life support to the structural integrity field, then back again, balancing the ship's survival on a knife's edge. "She's bleeding energy. Kyle," her voice crackled over the comm, strained over the scream of overloaded conduits. "Every time one of those protostars flares, it's like taking a torpedo hit. I can keep her together, but not forever." On the bridge, Kael was the calm eye of the storm. He stood with his feet planted wide, his hand resting on the back of Jax's chair, his gaze sweeping from the chaotic view screen to the fluctuating power readouts. He had made the call to dive into this chaos, and his crew's lives rested on that decision. "Eris," he said, his voice level. "How's our map?" Eris was strapped into the science station, his eyes closed. The prism, secured in its containment unit in the lab, was resonating with the nebula's raw, creative energy. The effect was like trying to listen to a whisper in the middle of a symphony orchestra. The background noise of creation was overwhelming, but within it, he could feel a faint, pure note calling to them. "The binary system is close," Eris managed, a trickle of blood running from his nose. "The path is clearer here. The nebula's chaos acts like a lens, focusing the way. But it's not just us in here. I can feel them. As if on cue, a proximity alert shrieked. A trio of distorted signatures appeared on their tail, moving through the plasma streams with an unnatural fluidity. The silent. They're faster than I thought, Jax muttered, his jaw tight. They're not fighting the currents. They're cutting through them. They erase the path ahead of them, Eris explained, his voice strained. They don't fly through space. They compel it to get out of their way. But the nebula is fighting back. The sheer creative force here. It makes it harder for them. It costs them. The hunters closed in. They're shifting. Angular forms like sharks made of shadow. They didn't fire weapons. They projected their influence. The ship's chronometer began to flicker, skipping seconds. Lena yelled over the comm that the engine's fusion reaction was becoming unstable, its own timeline momentarily disrupted. The very laws of physics aboard the drifter were beginning to fray. They're trying to unmake us, Kale growled. Eris, if you have another one of your magic words, now would be a good time. Eris knew what he had to do. He unstrapped himself and stumbled toward the lab, the ship lurching violently. He reached the prism. It was glowing now, a deep, vibrant purple, drinking in the nebula's energy. He knew direct contact would be catastrophic, but he needed more power, a clearer voice. He reached out, not with his hand, but with his mind, focusing on a single, complex glyph he had been struggling to master. It was the concept of cohesion, of integrity. He was trying to reinforce the ship not with energy, but with a command. He spoke the word in his mind, a silent shout into the void. A wave of golden light pulsed from the prism, washing through the ship. For a moment, the chronometer steadied. The groaning of the hull lessened. Lena's voice came over the comm, breathless. Whatever you just did, do it again. The reactor just stabilized. But the effort cost him. The world dissolved into a blinding white light, and Eris felt a tearing sensation, as if his own atoms were being pulled apart and stitched back together. He collapsed against the bulkhead, his vision swimming. On the bridge, the temporary reprieve was over. Two of the hunters flanked them, while the third fell back, beginning to project a focused distortion field directly in their path. The space ahead of them began to warp, folding in on itself, creating a dead end, a wall of non-existence. They're boxing us in, Jax yelled. I can't fly through that. It'll tear us to pieces. Kale stared at the unfolding trap, his mind racing. They couldn't go back, and they couldn't go forward. Then he saw it, a flicker of impossible violence on the long-range sensors. A cosmic time bomb, a young magnetar, a star with a magnetic field so powerful it could strip the data from a ship's computer from a light year away, was on the verge of a starquake. Its crust was about to rupture, unleashing a gamma-ray burst of unimaginable power. It was certain death, and it was their only chance. Jax, Kyle said, his voice dangerously calm. Bring us about. I want you to plot a course that skims the magnetar's exclusion zone. Right at the moment of the quake. Jax stared at him as if he'd gone insane. Captain, the radiation alone will fry every system we have. We'll be cooked before we get halfway there. Ariz, Kale bellowed, his voice echoing through the ship. I need a word for ward or deflection, something to keep that radiation off our backs for just a few seconds. In the lab, Ariz pulled himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He could feel the magnetar, a node of pure, furious energy. He could also feel the apathetic hunger of the silent behind them. He looked at the prism, at the storm of knowledge within. The glyph for deflection was complex, a fractal pattern of interwoven concepts that required perfect clarity and immense focus. To attempt it in his current state was to risk burning his mind out completely. He didn't hesitate. He placed both hands on the containment field, pouring every ounce of his will into the prism, shaping the glyph in his mind. The drifter swung around in a gut-wrenching turn, flying directly away from the orrery signal and toward the raging magnetar. The silent hunters, surprised by the suicidal maneuver, followed, their forms tightening as they moved in for the kill. "It's coming!" Lena screamed from engineering as alarms wailed a chorus of doom. "The quake is imminent!" "Hold on!" Kale roared. At that moment, Eris screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but of pure, unrestrained power. A shell of shimmering, iridescent light enveloped the Stardust Drifter, a perfect multi-layered shield that seemed to be made of frozen music. Seconds later, the magnetar's crust shattered. A wave of gamma rays and relativistic particles, a sterilizing wave of cosmic fury, erupted outwards. The silent hunters, caught in the direct path of the blast, were hit first. Their erasure fields, designed to counter ordered reality, had no defense against such a raw, chaotic burst of pure energy. Their shadowy forms flickered, dissolved, and were simply scoured from existence. Their silence finally and utterly broken. The wave washed over the drifter. The iridescent shield flared with impossible brilliance, holding for 3 critical seconds before shattering into a billion motes of fading light. The ship was thrown tumbling through space, its engines dead, its systems fried. A wave of secondary radiation washed over them, and every light, every console, every system went dark. They were adrift, powerless, and silent. For a long minute, the only sound on the bridge was the ragged breathing of Kyle and Jax. Then, the emergency batteries kicked in, casting the bridge in a dim, ghostly red glow. The ship was a wreck, but it was intact. Eris lay unconscious in the lab. Through a jagged crack in the main viewport, a new light shone. The chaotic, fiery clouds of the nebula had been blasted away by the magnetar's fury, creating a temporary pocket of clear space. And in that clearing, they saw it. 2 stars, one a brilliant white diamond, the other a pulsating invisible point of immense gravity, danced around each other. And hanging in the perfect stillness between them, impossibly vast and impossibly ancient, was a structure made of spun starlight and crystalline geometry. It was a latticework of glowing filaments and silent, floating towers, all arranged in the shape of the 3-pointed spiral glyph Eris had first seen in his vision. The orrery. It was real. "Well, I'll be damned," Jax whispered, his voice full of awe and terror. "You found it, Doc." Kyle stared at the sight, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind the bone-deep weariness of a man who had gambled everything and, against all odds, had won the hand. They were crippled and exposed, and their enemy now knew exactly what they were protecting. But they had made it. They had reached the library at the end of the universe. The Stardust Drifter drifted, a wounded animal in the sudden, shocking stillness. The orrery filled the viewport, a silent, majestic challenge. It wasn't a space station, it was a sculpture of reality, its crystalline arms spiraling out from the gravitational center of the binary stars, each filament glowing with a soft, internal light. It was a place where knowledge had been given physical form. The ship's silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of emergency power and the hiss of escaping atmosphere from a dozen minor hull breaches. Jax ran a desperate diagnostic, his face illuminated by the red glow of a single functioning monitor. Main power is out. Reactor's been scrammed by the gamma ray burst. Life support is on batteries. Maybe 6 hours. Long-range comms are a melted puddle of slag. We're deaf, dumb, and bleeding. Kale's gaze was fixed on the orrery. Can we get there? Jack shook his head. Main engines are dead. Maneuvering thrusters are spotty at best. We're in a stable decay orbit, but we'll fall into the white dwarf in about 12 hours. We're a floating coffin, Captain. From the comm, Lena's voice, raspy and exhausted, cut through the gloom. The reactor core isn't breached, just confused. The radiation scrambled the containment software. If I can manually realign the magnetic coils, I might be able to bring it back online. It's a long shot, and if I get it wrong, we'll become a very small, very brief star. How long? Kyle asked, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. 4 hours, maybe 5, and I'll have to do most of it in a vacuum suit outside the hull. Do it, Kyle ordered. He then turned and made his way to the lab. Aris was still unconscious, slumped against the wall where the backlash from the prism had thrown him. The obsidian codex floated serenely in the center of the room, its surface now a placid, non-reflective black. Kale knelt beside the academic, checking his pulse. It was faint but steady. He looked from Eris's pale, blood-streaked face to the silent, alien artifact. For the first time, he felt a sliver of something that wasn't pragmatism or fear. It was awe, the power Aris had wielded, the knowledge the prism contained. It was the ultimate salvage, a treasure beyond any price. And it was a burden that was killing the only man who could understand it. He managed to get Eris back to the small medbay, injecting him with a broad-spectrum nerve stabilizer and sealing a minor gash on his forehead. As he worked, he could hear the clanking and hissing of Lena making her way out of the airlock to begin her desperate spacewalk. The fate of his ship and crew rested on 2 people, an engineer wrestling with a star on the brink of collapse, and a linguist who was mentally adrift in a sea of cosmic grammar. There was nothing for him to do but wait. Hours crawled by. The red emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows on the bridge. Jax, having done all he could, monitored the ship's slow, inexorable drift toward the white dwarf. Kael paced, the confined space of the bridge feeling smaller with every passing minute. He was a man of action, and the enforced idleness was a unique form of torture. He found himself staring at the orrery. It didn't seem to be made of matter in the conventional sense. It was more like a persistent, complex thought that had been made manifest. As he watched, he saw a flicker of light, a pulse that traveled from the outer arms of the structure toward its core. It was responding to their presence. A soft chime echoed through the bridge, not over a speaker, but inside their heads, the same way Eris had described his first contact with the prism. It was a gentle, inquisitive sound, a stark contrast to the violence they had just endured. Then Eris stumbled onto the bridge, his eyes wide and unfocused, one hand pressed to the medbay sealant on his temple. "It's calling," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It knows we're here. It knows we have the codex." "It's a little late for a welcome party," Jax grumbled, not taking his eyes off their orbital decay projection. "We're not going to make it. Maybe we don't have to," Eris said, his eyes fixated on the crystalline structure. He looked different. The experience with the magnetar hadn't just drained him, it had changed him. There was a new, unsettling depth to his gaze, as if he were looking at two realities at once. The orrery isn't just a place. It's a transportation system, a network. He walked to the main viewport étage, placing his hand on the cold transparisteel. He closed his eyes, and a faint, golden light began to glow from the palm of his hand. The language, it's not just for making shields or lights. That's like using a starship's engine to toast bread. Its real purpose is to navigate reality, to plot a course through space-time by defining the destination. Eris, what are you doing? Kael asked, stepping toward him, a new kind of alarm in his voice. If we can't bring the ship to the orrery, Eris said, with his voice taking on a strange, resonant quality, we have to bring the orrery to the ship. He began to speak. The words weren't in any human tongue. They were a cascade of harmonic tones and complex, multi-layered concepts that filled the bridge. The air grew thick, vibrating with power. The golden light from his hand intensified, projecting the three-pointed spiral glyph onto the viewport. The glyph expanded, shimmering, and then shot out from the ship like a beacon of pure meaning. A laser-focused sentence fired across the void. It struck the central core of the orrery. For a moment, nothing happened. The ship continued its slow, fatalistic drift. Then, the entire orrery pulsed with a brilliant, white light. A single, crystalline filament detached from the main structure, elongating, stretching across the space between them. It wasn't moving in a conventional sense. It was simply extending its existence, growing a bridge of solid light and geometry toward them. By all the gods, Jax breathed, his hands falling from the controls. The filament, a kilometer-wide causeway of glowing crystal, approached the drifter. It didn't collide with the ship. It simply phased through the hull, its substance passing through their own without interaction, until its tip came to rest in the center of the bridge, surrounding them all. The air inside the crystalline bridge was cool and smelled of ozone and something ancient, like dust and starlight. The red emergency lights of the ship were replaced by the filament's gentle, internal white glow. Suddenly, a panicked voice crackled over Kael's personal comlink. Kael, what in the hell is going on? The whole ship is inside some kind of light tunnel. It was Lena, still clinging to the hull outside. We're okay, Lena, Kael managed, his own voice tight with disbelief. Get back inside. Now. I can't. The airlock is obstructed by this. The filament solidified around them. The bridge of the Stardust Drifter was no longer a part of the ship. It was a bubble of reality enclosed within the orrery's causeway. Through the shimmering walls, they could see the rest of their crippled vessel, inert and dark, still drifting toward the white dwarf. They had been surgically extracted. The floor beneath them shifted, and they felt a smooth, irresistible sense of motion. They were being drawn along the filament, pulled toward the heart of the orrery. Eris collapsed, the effort finally overwhelming him. Kael caught him before he hit the floor, easing him down gently. The linguist was unconscious again, but this time his breathing was deep and even, as if he had finally found a peaceful sleep. Kael looked at Jax, whose pilot's mind was struggling to comprehend a form of transport that had no engines, no velocity, no G-forces. Welcome to the library, I guess, the captain said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. They arrived at the core of the orrery, a vast, spherical chamber whose walls were a living mosaic of light, constellations, and shifting glyphs. Their bubble of the drifter's bridge dissolved, and they found themselves standing on a solid, crystalline platform. The air was breathable, the gravity a comfortable 1G. In the center of the chamber, a figure coalesced from the light. It was tall and slender, humanoid but without distinct features. Its form a shimmering, semi-transparent cascade of starlight. It was a being made of pure information. "Welcome, speakers!" A voice echoed around them, genderless and melodic. "It has been long since a codex was returned." Kyle instinctively moved to stand in front of the unconscious heiress, his hand resting on the grip of the pulse pistol at his hip. A useless but comforting gesture. "Who are you?" "I am the caretaker," the being replied. "The last active protocol of this archive. I have maintained the orrery since the Great Silence fell." The caretaker turned its featureless gaze toward the prism, which had floated from the lab and now hovered beside them. "You have brought a fragment of the first verse, a dangerous and potent artifact to carry through the dark." "We noticed," Jax muttered. "The darkness has a name," Kyle said, his eyes locked on the caretaker. "The silent. They followed us here. They are always present where a voice can be heard," the caretaker said, a note of ancient sorrow in its tone. "They are the echo that seeks to devour the sound. They cannot enter the orrery, for its existence is a paradox they cannot resolve. But they will wait. They are patient." The being of light then drifted toward Eris. "This one. He has spoken the shaping tongue without the proper preparation. He has burned his mortal pathways. He has awakened the echo within his own blood. But it is a fire without a hearth. It will consume him." "Can you help him?" Kale asked, his voice raw. The caretaker paused. "The orrery is a library, not a hospital. But knowledge can be a medicine. To heal him, we must first understand the wound. He must be integrated with the archive. He must read and be read." The caretaker raised a shimmering hand, and the unconscious form of Eris floated into the air. Filaments of light extended from the chamber's walls, varied and weaving around him, cocooning him in a soft, glowing web. He is now connected to the core. He will either find the knowledge to rebuild his mind, or his consciousness will be unwritten and stored as a cautionary tale within our archives. Kale and Jax could only watch, helpless, as their crewmate was absorbed into the ancient, alien machine. The silence that followed was profound. "What now?" Jax asked, his voice small in the vast chamber. The caretaker turned back to them. "Now, you learn. The silent are not merely hunters, they are a symptom of a larger decay. The universe is losing its structure, its grammar. They are the final, inevitable period at the end of a fading sentence. To fight them is not enough. You must learn to speak again. You must learn to write a new verse." The walls of the chamber shimmered, and 1,000 new glyphs blazed into existence, a torrent of impossible knowledge. "Your education," the caretaker announced, "begins now." The education was a deluge. Kale and Jax stood on the crystalline platform as the caretaker unspooled millennia of knowledge, not as lessons, but as direct sensory experience. They didn't learn about the physics of the speakers. They were immersed in it. Kyle felt the birth of a sun not as a fusion reaction, but as a resonant, perfectly spoken word for light that gathered lesser concepts like hydrogen and gravity into its orbit. He understood command not as a hierarchy, but as the act of imposing a coherent narrative upon chaotic events. His pragmatism was not erased but tempered, sharpened into a tool that could now grasp the levers of reality itself. Jax, the pilot, experienced space-time not as a void to be traversed, but as a fabric that could be folded, pleated, and stitched. He felt the ship's journey through the nebula not as a sequence of maneuvers, but as a single, fluid sentence, a path of least resistance through the grammar of the cosmos. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and in a strange way, it felt like coming home. In the midst of this flood of impossible knowledge, Kyle's focus snagged on a single grounding thought. "Lena," he said, the word cutting through the cascade of light and sound. "My engineer. She's still out there on the ship." The caretaker's featureless form shimmered. A physical shell. Its relevance is infinitesimal when measured against the great silence. Kale's jaw tightened, the captain in him overriding the awestruck student. "She is my crew. Her relevance is absolute. We do not leave people behind. That is a rule that doesn't need to be written in starlight to be true." A pause, a flicker in the caretaker's form, as if it were processing this alien concept of loyalty. "A fascinating syntax of cohesion," the voice mused. "Very well." A second crystalline causeway extended from the orrery's core. It didn't just extract the bridge this time, it flowed around the entire wounded bulk of the Stardust Drifter. Metal and light passed through each other without conflict. The entire ship was drawn from the void and settled into a vast, glowing chamber that was part docking bay, part cathedral. Moments later, Lena stumbled through the bridge door, her face pale behind her helmet's visor, a plasma welder still clutched in one hand. She stared at the impossible architecture surrounding her ship, then at Kale and Jax. "Okay," she said, her voice shaky. "Either we're dead, or you two owe me the biggest drink in the galaxy." Before anyone could answer, the cocoon of light enveloping Eris pulsed with a final, blinding intensity, then dissolved. Eris floated gently to the platform, his feet touching the crystalline floor as if he were stepping onto solid ground for the first time. He opened his eyes. The ambient glow of humanity was gone, replaced by the deep, steady light of ancient stars. When he spoke, his voice was a chord, a harmony of his own familiar tone and a deeper, resonant frequency that vibrated in their bones. "The library is in ruins," he said, his gaze seeing things in the chamber that they could not. "The silent have been gnawing at the edges of this place for eons. Most of the knowledge, the grand verses of creation, are gone, erased. All that remains are the fundamentals, the alphabet, the grammar." He looked at his hands, then at his crew. "But that is enough. We don't need to read their story. We need to write our own." A deep, resonant alarm chimed through the orrery, a tolling bell of pure light. "They have grown impatient," the caretaker's voice echoed. "They feel the codex being integrated. They are preparing to unmake this entire sector of space. Outside, in the void, the shadows were gathering. No longer just a few hunters, but a legion, a swirling vortex of negation that was beginning to drain the light from the nebula and the binary stars themselves. Then, we give them a story they won't forget," Kyle said, his new understanding clicking into place. The crew moved with a purpose that transcended their old roles. They returned to the bridge of the Drifter, their small, familiar island of steel and sweat, now nested in the heart of cosmic knowledge. Lena, guided by the caretaker, didn't just repair the reactor, she integrated it with the orrery itself, turning their ship's engine into a conduit for conceptual power. Jax took the helm, his hands resting on the controls, but his mind was already reaching out, sensing the currents of reality beyond the hull. Kyle stood on his bridge, a captain ready to command his vessel on its most impossible voyage. Eris stood in the center of it all, a calm pillar of light. "The ship is the pen," he said softly. Lena is the anchor, keeping its syntax coherent in the physical world. Jax is the hand that guides it across the page. Kael, you are the will. You must choose the words. The Stardust Drifter lifted from the crystalline dock, its hull now shimmering with a faint, glyph-like energy. It moved out of the orrery and into the void. The silent descended, a maelstrom of anti-existence. They attack with a question, Eris said calmly. The question is, why do you exist? The answer is always, I do not. Then we need a better answer, Kael replied. His mind, now able to perceive the attack, not as energy but as logic, saw its structure. They are unraveling our right to be here. Oris, I need a word, not for shield, but for purpose. Give this ship a reason to exist that they cannot unravel. Eris closed his eyes. He spoke a single but yet resonant word as it flowed from him, through Kael's will, into the ship's systems. The drifter blazed with golden light. When the silence erasure fields hit, they didn't find a ship of metal and wire. They found an irrefutable statement of being. The fields faltered, unable to find a foothold in something that was now conceptually absolute. It's working, Jax yelled, weaving the ship through the storm of shadows. They can't get a grip on us. It's not enough to defend, Kael said, staring into the heart of the swirling darkness. They are a force of subtraction. We must counter with creation. He looked at Eris. All of it. Don't give them a word. Give them the whole dictionary. A profound understanding passed between the captain and the linguist. Eris was not just a conduit. He was the source. Kael was not just a commander. He was the editor. Eris opened his mouth and began to speak. He spoke not of shields or weapons, but of complexity, of beauty, of defiant and unnecessary creation. As he spoke, the drifter became a vessel of Genesis, a trail of impossible. Crystalline flora bloomed in its wake, living for only a moment before sublimating into pure light. Notes of unheard music rippled through the void, causing the silence forms to lose cohesion. The ship's engines, once burning reactor fuel, now burned with the pure fire of a new idea, a story being told in the face of oblivion. The silent recoiled, confused. They were a force of utter simplicity, and they were being drowned in a tidal wave of infinite complexity. But they were relentless. The vortex of darkness began to collapse inward, focusing all its power on a single point, the ship. It was their final gambit to erase not just the vessel, but the entire concept it represented. They're going to wipe the slate clean, Lena warned, her console bleeding red alerts. Captain, Jax said, his voice steady. They have to have a source, a core. Kael saw it then. In the center of the darkness, a point of perfect, unreflective silence, the source of the question. He knew their final word. Eris, he said, his voice a low, steady command. The concept of an answer. Eris nodded, a faint smile on his lips. He took a deep breath and spoke the final verse. It was not a word of light or creation. It was a word of profound peace, of acceptance. It was a statement of understanding, directed at the core of the silent. It did not fight their question. It answered it. The word shot from the ship, a sliver of pure, empathetic logic. It struck the core, and the effect was not an explosion, but a release. A wave of profound stillness washed through the silent. Their furious, hungry negation was replaced by a sense of completion. Their hunt was over. They had asked their question for an eternity, And for the first time, they had received an answer. The vortex of shadows stopped swirling. Then, slowly, gracefully, it folded in on itself, shrinking not into nothingness, but into a single, perfect point of tranquil silence, which then faded from view. The void was empty. The stars of the Caledon Nebula blazed in the sudden, peaceful dark. On the bridge of the Stardust Drifter, there was only the soft hum of an engine that now ran on the power of a story well told. The crew stood in silence, forever changed. They were no longer scrappers. They were the first of the new speakers. The caretaker's voice echoed gently in their minds one last time. The first verse is written. The page is turned. The great silence has been answered. The universe waits for your next chapter. Cale looked at the star chart on his screen, a universe of infinite, unspoken possibilities. He looked at his crew, his anchor, his navigator, his voice. Set a course. Jax, he said, his voice filled with a weary but burning hope. Anywhere. The Stardust Drifter, its hull faintly shimmering with the memory of creation, turned its nose toward the endless dark. A single, defiant word sailing into the quiet expanse, ready to begin the next sentence.